Hey guys, it's Chris again, and we are back with the second video in the Summer Vibes card making virtual class. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through cutting the project. So obviously you're going to be down on my desktop the whole time, and we're just going to work our way through the cutting guide. We're going to cut it exactly the same way as the instructions will walk you through. So if you don't need this part, then you don't have to watch this video, but we're just literally going to cut the paper for the 16 cards in this video. Okay, so I'm just going to switch the camera so you're looking down at my table. Okay, so there are four different cards and we're making four of each design. So what I'm going to say is I've just cut up a little post-it piece of paper and I've numbered them 1 through 4. And I'm just going to put them up here. It might just slightly be out of camera view, but you probably don't really need to just see my piles. I wanted to keep more of my trimmer and the cutting guide on the table for you to be able to see than necessarily do you need to see my pieces of post-it notes. Okay, so just a few things we're gonna, like I said, we're cutting it exactly how they have designed it. So I'm just gonna move my paper slightly out of the way so that we have a little bit more space to work with. And so first thing, we're gonna talk about the cutting guide a little bit. So it walks you through exactly how to cut the cards for the project. So like I said, they're all numbered 1 through 4. So as we cut them, we're just going to move them up into the pile. The other thing is, close to my heart always does their dimensions. They are not height versus width, it's width versus height, and I don't cut that way. So you're going to see that I'm going to have my cutting guide facing sideways just so that I don't cut incorrectly because I'm used to totally cutting the opposite direction. But that's just me. Like I said, if you're used to it the other way, then go ahead. Okay, so every once in a while, if I move too fast, the camera's going to try and autofocus. So I'm going to try not to move too fast. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut one of the zip strips off and we're going to put them in the pile. So we're going to cut one zip strip and I'm just going to line it up in my trimmer just so that just no more white shows. So you'll see the zip strip is a little white strip with a yellow scallop on it. So we need pieces that are 3 by 1/2 inch, and we're going to cut 4 of them, and they're for project number 1. So we are just going to cut 4 of those and put them in our pile number 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that just goes into our pile number 1 for project number 1. You'll also see down here that this shows the paper and the orientation that you're supposed to cut the paper. So I'm going to make the first cut right here, and it says 4 by, these are all 4 by something. So we're going to make the first cut at 4 inches. So here we go. Now, because the wave paper is directional, it does make a difference as to you don't want to cut it in the wrong direction. So we're going to cut these at 2 1/4, and we're going to cut 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're going into pile number 2. So 2 1/4. So we're cutting 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm just going to put those in pile number 2. And now down here at the bottom, these are 4 by 3/4, and they're also for project number 2. So for cutting the 3/4 of an inch, I like to do it on this side of the trimmer. I just find it a little bit easier. So we're just going to do 1, 2, and it works out perfectly for the last 2. And we will just put those in pile number 2. Okay, and then we need this next piece, which it says 5.5 by 4.25. So we're going to put this in at 5.5, and we'll cut at 4.25. And we get 2 of those. And that is for card number 1. So we're going to put that in pile number 1, and I'm just going to keep my scraps over here. Okay, so then we need our next piece of Summer Vibes paper. I'm just going to quickly cut off the zip strip. Okay, and so we need 5.25 by 4. So 5.25 by 4, and we'll get obviously 3 of those. And this is for card number 4. Okay, so that's in pile number 4. And now we're doing the 5.5 and 4.25. So we need 2 of those, and they're going in pile number 1, sorry. There we go. And we'll put that in pile number 1. So we're finished 2 pieces of paper already. And so now we're moving on to our last piece of the Summer Vibes paper. And we are going to just cut off the zip strip because it just starts at the top of the paper. Set it aside. So my first cut is at 3.5. And I'm going to cut 2 pieces that are then 5.5. And that goes into pile number 3. So 5.5. And a second one. Okay, and so that's in our pile number 3. And now we need to cut 5.5. And 3.5. And we're getting 2 of those, and they're going in pile number 3. Okay, and then we have this last one that is 5.5 by 4. So 5.25. And that's for card number 4. So we'll put that in our last pile there. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to my peach piece of cardstock. And we are going to cut first at 4.25. And then we need to cut at 5.5. And these are both going into pile number 3. Scraps over here. And we'll put that in pile number 3. Again, we're going to cut at 4.25. We need 2 more pieces. that are 5.5 to complete our 4 cards. Okay, so there we go. And then our last cut for peach is 1.5 by 4. So I'm going to cut at 1.5 by 4, and these are for project number 2. And then our last one. There we go. That's cut. And now we're going to move on to our smoothie. And we need 4 by 3. So 4 by 3, and these are for project number 1. Okay, and then our next cut, we need 2 by 3s. And they go into project number 3. And now for our last cut, we need 1/2 inch by 4, and we need obviously 4 of those. And they are for project number 2. So like I said, I like to do the smaller cuts on this side of my trimmer. So 1/2 inch by 4, and they're going in pile number 2. And we are almost finished. That's our excess for another project. There we go. And so now we have our nectarine piece, and this is our last piece of colored cardstock before we cut our whites. And so we have 4 by 5.25. And we're going to cut 2 of those. And then we need to cut these diagonally. So we need 2 cuts diagonally, and that will be for our card number 4. So I'm just placing my cardstock. I can see it in my cutting channel, the 2 corners. So I'm just lining them up in the track. And then because it's a point that I am slicing through, I'm just going to lift up my blade and place it down just slightly somewhere in that line, just because then when you cut through, you don't nick your triangle or push the tip out of the way. So there's 1. And same thing, 2, and those are for card number 4. And then this little piece, we have 4, and then we need 1/4. So these are for card number 2, just little tiny. So 1, 2, When you get small pieces like this too, just make sure they're lined up and then make sure you're putting pressure on your um, bar so that it's not sliding once you're down to little bits of cardstock that you're cutting. Okay, so 4. So that's it for our nectarine. So all that gets set aside now. And now we just have our white daisy left. Okay, so one of the pieces we need to cut at 3 3/4 by 2 3/4. So, and these are going into the pile for card number 1. Okay, so they go into my card number 1 pile. And then the last cut here for this piece is 1 3/4 by 2 3/4. So I'm just making sure I pressure on my ruler so it doesn't slide. And then 2 3/4. And we're going to put these in pile number 3. Okay, so the last piece of white daisy cardstock is for all of your thin cuts. So people like to do these 2 different ways, and it's totally a personal preference. So you can either cut your die cuts and then stamp on top of them, or stamp and then die cut. So I am going to cut my pieces because I prefer to stamp and then run them through my die cutting machine. So I'm going to cut them according to the directions. If you prefer to stamp and then, or cut and then stamp, you could just follow the directions to do it in reverse. So I'm just going to cut them according to the directions before I stamp. So the first is 2 by 12, and I'm just going to make, just moving my scraps out of the way here, and I'm going to make a stamping pile. So 2 by 12, 2 1/4 by 12, and these are for, because the ice cream cone is just a little bit bigger. And then a 2 1/2 by 12, a 2 1/2 by 12, and then your last piece is for your watermelon. Okay, we're just going to talk a little bit about the stamping. So if I was going to stamp now, I would get my Versamat. So we have a product called Versamat, and one side is hard and the other side is spongy, and it gives you a better stamping surface. So I'm just going to stamp one of each of these images, and then we're going to finish this video and move on to the next one. So I just wanted to talk about the stamping for a second. So if you don't have a Versamat, then always remember to use the white foam that's included in your stamp set. I'm just going to use this as a second cushion underneath my stamp, and it actually makes it a little bit easier for you guys to see. So we're going to stamp one of every image, and then I'm going to do the rest off camera, just because you don't need to watch me stamp repeatedly over and over again. So all my piles are in reverse. So we will go like this. And first, you'll see it tells you exactly how many of everything you need to cut. So the first image is the snow cone. Now, this is not a new stamp, but if it was a new stamp, at this point, when I load it onto my block, so I try and find the smallest block possible for the image. I just find that I have far more control over it. So if this was a new stamps out of the stamp set, or even if you just like to do it each time, which I kind of do, just you're just going to take the film off of the stamp by running it on your skin. Some people stamp it repeatedly to get, when it comes to you brand new, there's like a factory finish on it. So you just want to remove that to improve the stamping. So I'm going to use intense black. And like I said, because I'm going to color mine with my markers. So I want intense black ink, and our ink pads are magnetic. So they're super easy to use. I'm just going to set that other part aside for now. So I'm just going to ink up my stamp and stamp a snow cone for you. Okay. So they're clear so you can see through them. So there you go. So now I would just repeat this as many times as it says on the instructions. So for example here, I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I'll stamp 8 down this whole line of cardstock. And 4 of them are for project number 2. And then, oh no, all 12 of them are for project number 2, sorry. Okay, so then the next image you can see, so you just stamp all 12 and then thin cut them out. So now I'm going to just stamp the ice cream cone. So the ice cream cone, you need 4 of them. So again, I'm actually going to use the same size stamp set or block. Again, right, I'd rub it on my skin and then ink up my image. Just check that I have ink on it and then stamp it. Okay, and then you're just going to repeat it through the whole process. So then you would stamp 4 of the ice cream cones and cut them out. And then we're going to do the popsicle because that is the next. If you don't want it on the small block, feel free to move it onto a slightly bigger block if you're more comfortable doing that. So then we're going to stamp a popsicle. So you need for the popsicle 12 of them. So you would stamp it 12 times and then cut them out. Okay, and you just keep going along like that. Okay, so then you do your popsicle, and then these images are this sprinkle one. Now I would thin cut those first so that I know that I'm getting my sentiment centered. So I'm going to do that off camera after. And then the last one is the watermelon and the stay cool also. The stay cool, it's completely up to you as to whether you want to stamp it first or cut it out first. It's totally a personal preference. So I'm just going to now stamp one of the watermelons for you, and you would cut and stamp 8 of those. Okay, and I'm just going to check my. Okay, maybe we'll do one of the stay cools just because the thin cut is tight around the stay cool. That's another example that I might actually probably stamp first and then thin cut. And I'm going to use my stamp chamois and clean off my stamps once I've finished all of my stamping. But so you can see here for the Stay Cool, we need 4 of those. So I'm just going to ink it up and stamp it once for you. And I can just see on my edge here, I've got a little bit of ink. Okay, so there we go. So I'm just going to off camera uh, finish all my stamping and I'll clean up my stamps and then we'll be back. And I think we're going to assemble them one card at a time. I'm not sure if we will do separate videos for each card just yet. Just give me a few minutes to think about that, but we'll be back. And so I have all my piles here. Sorry, I'm just going to go back the other way for a second. So for example, here I have, this is for card number 1. So I'm going to put all my pieces with my Post-it note. I'm going to go through and finish my stamping for card number 1 and put them all in a pile. And then I will start working my way through my piles. So when we come back, all this stuff will be in a pile and ready to go for stamping the cards. Okay, thanks guys. We'll see you in a few minutes.